Welcome, everybody, and good morning. I'd like to start with some words by Carolyn Owen-Towle. Come into this house of worship. Come in, bringing all of who you are. Rest and quiet your weak, worn spirit. For you are here to touch again eternal springs of hope and renewal. Calm your hurried pace. For this hour, let the cares, the fretfulness, and the worry be set aside. Forgive yourself. For you are so very worthy of moving on, of making new efforts, of trying again. Know that you are not alone. There is strength and caring support for you here. You will find comfort if you but ask. Look around. You are part of potential community. You can make of it what you will. Enter into this house of worship. So, as is our custom, I will light our chalice candle as a symbol of our free religious faith. And I invite those of you joining us online to light a candle too, if you would like to. May our chalice flame consume our regrets for the past and our fears for the future and our worries about today. May it light for us a time of joy and of peace. May it be so. Welcome, everybody. And let's sing our first hymn today, which is number 43. I've noticed I've chosen hymns that all end in 3. I don't know if there's any significance in that. Probably not. But this one is number 43, Gathered the Spirit. And it's in the purple hymn books if you'd like one, but the words will appear on the screen. So let us come into a time of prayer. Spirit of life, I find you in those humble places, the quiet, still spaces where I am held in a love greater than myself. You are the wind in my breath, the fire in my soul, and the subtle heartbeat of creation all around. Oh God, your love is unimposing, yet firm and steadfast, present to all those who would know your peace. You challenge me in my arrogance and move me to listen deeply when I fail, as I always do, to see the fuller picture. Spirit of love, you find the gentle words to speak life into me and hold me when all else around me and in me feels broken. You remind me that I am loved and saved just as I am. Remind me of who I am, O holy mystery. Help me to see you in the small, everyday moments where you are found. Grant me the wisdom to listen for you and seek you in those unlikely and unexpected places. May it be so. Amen. Our story this morning is called Rabbit Looks for God. This service, well, this whole theme this month is about maturing, which is something we can all do all the time and do all the time, backwards and forwards again. And this story may not immediately seem to chime with that theme, but I hope it will become apparent later why I've chosen it. So one day, Rabbit set out from the woods, carrying a question to all the other creatures that it met. The rabbit came first to a butterfly, fluttering in an open field. I know lots of you like butterflies. And asked, "Friend butterfly, what can you tell me about the thing called God?" And the butterfly thought for a moment, the way they do, and said, "God is the guiding wind that blows me from this field to that one, and points me to where the weather is warm, and I can help the flowers bloom by flying from one to another." And the rabbit thanked the butterfly and continued on its journey. Coming to a horse who was grazing at the other end of the field, the rabbit hopped up and asked, "Friend, horse, what can you tell me about the thing called God?" The horse looked at the rabbit, still chewing away at the sweet grass, and said, "God is the ground that holds me up, gives folks an open field to walk and run and all this lovely grass to eat." And the rabbit thanked the horse and hopped further onward. A little later, it came to a slow running stream, and peeking over the bank, the rabbit spotted a fish. The rabbit dipped its mouth into the water to ask, "Friend, fish, what can you tell me about this thing called God?" And then the rabbit raised its head back up and put one ear into the water to listen for the answer. And the fish replied, "God is the water I swim in. It surrounds me all the time and gives me something to breathe and move through. It's something that everyone needs to live." And the rabbit thanked the fish and bounded off again, and very soon after almost ran right into a tree. "Friend tree, what can you tell me about this thing called God?" And the tree answered slowly, but without hesitating. "God is the light that feeds me and all of my neighbours and family. I spend all of my days reaching up towards it and encouraging the shorter trees to do the same." And the rabbit thanked the tree and, seeing that it was getting late in the day by now, set off home for the night. But as the rabbit was approaching its den, its neighbour, the squirrel, called out from nearby, "Friend rabbit, after your long day of asking the same question over and over, what can you now tell me about the thing called God?" And the rabbit thought for a while and then said, "What I can tell you is that the butterfly cares deeply for the flowers. The horse wants everyone to have open fields to roam on. The fish knows everyone needs water to live. And the tree hopes its children will grow as tall as it has grown." And the rabbit went down to its burrow and slept for the night. I'll come back to that later. But first, I wonder if any of you have been picking blackberries recently. I know I have. And I was pleased to discover a poem. I think it's a beautiful little poem by Gerda, German poet, who in fact was one of the children on Kindertransport. She was born in 1927. And this is her story, her poem, Lieselott Among the Blackberries. And Schuler will read it for us.
Lieselott Among the Blackberries by Gerda. Caught on September's blackberry hook, her hands reach out for the sweet, dark fruit, wholly under the blackberry spell. Hurry up, Lieselott, it is late. Plenty of time. She feigns death and dawdles. Old woman, tasting the last of the fruit, in sunny oblivion, in a still brightness.
Thank you, Sheila. We had to have a little discussion about how you pronounce Lieselott. We don't really know, but I think that sounds as good as any. Let's sing again. And our second hymn is number 83, Just As Long As We Have Breath. It's in the purple hymn books, number 83.
Amen.
So this is the end of summer for me emotionally. When I come back from my music course, as I did last week from Ireland, it's always the end of August, and there's always this distinct feeling of a new season coming. And I know the equinox is not until the 23rd, but personally, I can't escape the sense of summer drawing to a close now. The evenings are noticeably darker, and the blackberries are coming to an end, and the apples are ripening. And the other evening, I actually felt chilly for the first time in ages. Maybe you noticed that too. And of course, as some of you know, and you might have guessed from the opening music, today is my 64th birthday. So another year, another start, another new beginning. So I like this time of year. I enjoy the poignancy of it, the endings, the beginnings. That song, the Beatles song, I only played the vocals from it this morning. When I'm 64, was released in May 1967. Can you believe? When I was only 9 years old. And when the Fab Four themselves were still in their mid-20s. And goodness me, 64 must have seemed truly ancient to us all then. And it may still seem ancient to some of you. And perhaps it's because of the song that this year does feel like something of a milestone for me. I think I've been hearing that song all my life. So time for some readjustment, maybe. Kathleen Dowling-Singh, author of The Grace of Aging, writes, adjusting our views of ourselves can take some time. Adjusting our views of our place in the world and of our further direction can also take some time. New questions emerge, often clamoring for attention. Who am I beyond the functions I have served? Who am I when the habits of a lifetime are stripped away? Who am I beyond the persona I've presented to the world and to myself? Who am I bare? And we might add, as the song goes, and will you still need me? I know some of you will have been making such adjustments for some time. And for others, they may still feel as though they're on the distant horizon. But a life, if we're lucky, spans several decades. And they can't all be on an upward trajectory, at least not in the ways we grow accustomed to thinking of in our youth. Maybe we spent the first half of our lives busily growing and learning and planning for the future. But then we reach a point where the future diminishes and we realize it's significantly exceeded by the past. What then? Richard Rohr, the Christian theologian and writer, writes in his book, Falling Upward, A Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life. He writes that one of the best kept secrets, and yet one that's hidden in plain sight, is that the way up is the way down. Or if you prefer, the way down is the way up. This pattern, he writes, is obvious in all of nature. From the very change of the seasons and substances on this earth to the 600 million tons of hydrogen that the sun burns every day that lights and warms our earth. Yet it is still a secret because probably we don't want to see it. We don't want to embark on a further journey if it feels like it's going down. And this, he says, is surely the first and primary reason why many people never get to the fullness of their own lives the supposed achievements of the first half of life have to fall apart and show themselves to be wanting in some way, or we will not move further. Which is an interesting thought, I think, that the fullness, in fact, may lie in the demise. And so back to the story of Rabbit. I think what it spoke to me of was of the busyness of a quest, followed by a quieter acceptance and a gentle emergence of a different kind of understanding. I love the answers that Rabbit got from the other animals about the thing called God. Some of them were mystical. God is the wind that guides us, the ground that holds us up, the water we swim in, the light that nourishes us. And some of them were a bit more practical about how we might live together well. So we can help the flowers bloom, said the butterfly. So we can all be free to walk and run and eat, says the horse. So we can eat, breathe and move, adds the fish. So we can reach upwards and encourage others to reach upwards too, says the tree. And what I notice is that the definitions of the thing called God in this story are all very subjective. They differ according to each animal's perspective and its way of being, and they're all relevant to its unique purpose in life. And yet each answer also holds something of universal truth about the nature of relationship with the divine. So Rabbit, who might be you or might be me, scurries around asking questions, but crucially is curious rather than argumentative. Rabbit listens and accepts the various different takes on a question that, after all, none of us can truly ever answer satisfactorily. It feels as though there's a wise maturity in Rabbit's final words to the squirrel. Rabbit has heard, and Rabbit has begun to understand the different ways in which each animal experiences the divine in their own lives. And that turns out to be definition enough. I had an interesting conversation during coffee last week with Christine, who isn't here today, one of our members, about why we don't talk more about the meaning of life, which is a good question. And I think actually on reflection, we do talk about it, but perhaps not always directly, and not in ways that arrive at any particular answer. Because each of us is always, I think, finding new meaning in our lives. We're re-experiencing what God means for us all the time, and what our own lives mean in this moment. I know when I was younger, I used to hunger for answers, and I wanted definitions. I love to argue and debate theology, but I find I have little appetite for that now. It's not that I've lost interest in God or life or meaning, you might be pleased to know. It's just a feeling that I no longer find the divine that way by trying to pin it down to some words. Maybe that's one of the signs of maturing, I don't know. I do know that getting older inevitably brings loss, does it not? And that takes some getting used to. I know that in some ways I'm only on the nursery slopes of that learning. And I know some of you are already having to grapple with illness and bereavement and loss of some of the capabilities and the faculties that you once had. And maybe there is sadness or even despair at some times about that, which I think feels inevitable and truthful and is probably a necessary part of the process. But I've also seen acceptance come and readjustments made and a willingness to look in the mirror and be courageously honest about what the limitations of life are now, but also what are the possibilities. Such as letting go of some of the expectations we once had about what we can and can't do, including embracing unexpected opportunities that seem to present themselves and accepting what is. I think of our friend Ralph finishing his memoirs in time for his 100th birthday, in spite of his frailty and his blindness. I think of Thelma, who's sitting here shortly after coming out of hospital last year, going on her first ever march and loving it. I think of Suzanne about to go up in a hot air balloon this week. For the first time, I believe. I hope that I too can find moments of grace and adventure in the journey ahead. And opportunities for freedom and fluidity too, along with the trials and the challenges of journeying into aging, into what just might be the fullness, in fact, of life. Meanwhile, today, we are here, each of us, at our own stage of life, each gradually maturing in our own ways. And meanwhile, however old or young we are, there are vital qualities that we can all always lean more into. Things like curiosity, things like generosity, wisdom, mischief, openness. None of these things are age-related. And in some ways, maybe we get better at them as we get older. And meanwhile, the thing called God remains the ground that holds us up, remains forever the water that we swim in, and will eternally be the light that we move towards until our dying breath, and maybe beyond, who knows. Like any good story, and each of our lives is a good story. A life has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And yes, in answer to the first question, will you still need me? We are all needed at every stage of it. So let's learn to honour and embrace it all. Blessed be to each and every one of you. It's time for our last hymn, which is number 93. We love, we cry. Hymn number 93 in the purple hymn books.
We love, we cry, we live, we die, we dance, we sing our song. We need to feel there's something here to which we can belong. We need to feel the freedom just to have some time
Our closing words are by Michael Schuler. And he says, cherish your doubts, for doubt is the servant of truth. Question your convictions, for beliefs too tightly held strangle the mind and its natural wisdom. Suspect all certitudes, for the world whirls on, nothing abides. Yet, in our inner rooms full of doubts and inquiry, let a corner be reserved for trust. For without trust, there is no space for communities to gather or for friendships to be forged. And this is such a place where we hope for both. May it be so.